Hopefully our live stream on this platform in the audio is a lot better. Gone out and invested in some Bluetooth, so less cords, seeing how it works. Just doing a bit of an audio check in relation to this. Hopefully people can hear it.
Can you hear it?
It's
Can you
good.
find it?
Okay,
There's a little bit of feedback, like room, like off your shirt or the room, or maybe it might be the aircon or something.
Might be there. Is that on? I don't think the aircon's on.
Aircon's not on.
No.
Or maybe the little machine line.
Yeah.
Maybe this little machine behind me,
Turn it off at the wall.
which is our chi activator.
It's that.
Yeah, it is. Okay. Cool. Hey, hello everyone. Wow, beautiful. Got some new faces coming on in to visit, so wonderful to have you here. And this evening, lectures on non-duality, tea with Mo. The last session that we had, we just had it in-house and we didn't put it on Facebook or YouTube because of the recording, and it was interesting that quite an intimate sharing, and when I went to put it up on YouTube the sound wasn't recorded, so in a sense it was only for the ears of the people who then came to see it, which was quite fitting based upon the conversation that it held. I'm going to take you to where we're going to go today, and also bring you back to really understanding the point of reference that we're coming from here. The Inner-Light Meditation Centre, the philosophy is of non-duality or non-dualism, where everything is one. Everything comes from the one prime creator. Everything is born from the one. And even if we want to look at it from a physical perspective of understanding the universe, this thing called the Big Bang came from, in a sense, no thing into something, and something was created in the Big Bang, and that one something then expanded into what we call the universe. So there's this point of singularity that everything then came from, and when we start to look at it from a quantum physics perspective and also physics perspective, this point of singularity that expands out within the universe will also then start to one day collapse into another point of singularity. So we can sort of see that everything does start from one thing. From a physical, biological perspective, and non-dualism is more so around including that and understanding that you are a fractal of this one thing called a creator, a prime creator. And you are endowed, in a sense, with the same essence of that as well. So I really want to remind remind myself of that, and also as we journey from that, we'll then start to move from this non-dualistic lens. It's interesting, I'm trying to use hand gestures as points of reference of coming from something to going to something. You know, we say, over this inward journey and this outward journey, but yet everything's all encompassing all at the same time, and the mind has its challenges to try to understand that. So tonight, primarily non-dualism, and then moving into coming to an understanding, or at least having the discussion surrounding this thing called the ego. And skyhooks, ego is not a dirty word, yeah? And yet it has been given great connotations that it's a bad thing. We need to get rid of it, we need to transcend it, we need to cut it out, we need to dissolve it. We need to ignore it, in a sense. For us to be spiritual, for us to transcend into this state of enlightenment, we need to let go of this thing called the ego. I wanted to then present to you from the lens of internal family systems, which is a beautiful model of psychotherapy, or therapy, let's call it, in looking at what the ego is and ego states, which are really parts, there's parts of us that make the whole, in a sense, and coming to an understanding that every part has value. And it's interesting, when I wrote my book, The Art of Intentional Living, the first chapter is Shut Up Mind, and it's basically talking about the purpose of the mind. And I didn't realise how close I was to the truth, other than this felt right at that particular time. And I'll always say to people, whenever we do meditation courses and mindfulness courses, that you're not your mind, your mind's a part of you. And how correct that was, and yet also how much of an introduction it was. Since finding IFS, I've then also come to the recognition of the myth of mono-mind. So that we have one mind, and that one mind is one thing that's working, in a sense, against you, working for you, keeping you safe, keeping you alive. When in actual fact it's a multiplicity mind. It's a polymind, if you want to look at it from that sense. So there's many parts of the mind, there's many personalities of the mind. And to even a certain degree, that we are multiple personalities. So when we look at multiple personality disorder, it's the person has fused to those personalities, or those personalities have come to the forefront and had to, in a sense, protect the self so much that they then are, in a sense, not necessarily unable to shift from them, but they can't recognise that there are other personalities that are part of the one mind. And so when we then see these multiple personality disorders, we all are, we all have multiple personalities. I'm already giving you the bits and pieces, and then I really want to then bring back to this non-dual perspective. So we start at non-dualism, we go into dualism, here's this concept, and then step back into non-dualism and go, well, what is the purpose of this? And if I am a spiritual being, if I am consciousness having a human experience, all of these parts that I think that I am at that particular time, all of these personalities that I think that I am, how do they interact with me being spiritual? How do they interact with me being consciousness, having a human experience? So that's where we're going to go. Non-dualism, dualism, back to non-dualism. That's sort of the journeys that we take in these conversations. Here, let's talk about this. Remember where this can be your truth, can just be a point of reference to maybe look at yourself, your life, others as well. So not necessarily truth. Not necessarily truth. Take from it what you feel comfortable with and leave behind what you don't as well. So let's start at the beginning, in a sense, talking about non-dualism, and probably one of the ways that I can, in a sense, best describe it is that this concept, let's look at it from concepts and models. This concept that there is one prime creator and that we are a fractal of that one prime creator. That fractal of that one prime creator is similar to the analogy if I get a candle and I get one candle and I get, say, 7 tea light candles around it, and I light the one candle, and that flame that comes from that one candle, I then get all of the other candles and then I light it from that one candle. The flame itself, the light, is the same essence, and yet each one of those candles gets a different viewpoint of life, the viewpoint of its own experience. So if I place it in a septagon, in a sense, I've got 7 different viewpoints of the one candle in the middle, and then also have all of these variables of different viewpoints of the room and its own experience. So if we could look at ourselves as this flame, this essence, that is a reflection of the one essence that creates everything, then we might be able to come to an understanding that each one of those flames, each one of these individual units of consciousness is having its own experience, its own unique experience, and yet the essence of every other self is the same as the essence of you. We can easily look at that from the human being perspective. I'm a human being, you're a human being. We're part of the same species. We're not different. So we come from that. We create separation and go, I'm a human being and this is an animal, this is a cow, this is a dog, this is a plant, this is Madonna lily, or whatever it is that you want to call it. This is plastic. So in a sense we then create this separateness. However, when we start to look at it from a non-dual lens, everything is consciousness having its own individual unit of experience of this time and space that we call Earth at this particular time. So the question is, why is this happening? Why? You know, that's a really big question. And you know, when we start to consider this, let's use the word God, let's use the word creator, supreme creator, point of singularity, prime creator, the essence of being, the universe in a sense. We have these concepts of its being omnipotent. You know, it knows all, it sees all, it is formless and yet has a form. So it is the paradox, it's the living paradox. And the reason why the prime creator can know everything is because it gets to experience everything through itself. So this body is made of 70 trillion cells. So I can say that this body is having its own experience, and I can get to know this experience. Do all of these individual cells recognize that they are part of a larger system? Or do they think that they're actually separate and that they have particular roles? So it's the same as us as human beings. You know, we're all part of one larger cell or one larger body, and that could be the Earth, that could be the human species, it could be the solar system, and it could be the universe. The thing is that we get caught up in, because we've been taught, conditioned this way, that we are separate to others. We're separate to things because that looks different to this. And there's a beauty in that, because in the separateness, one allows oneself to have your own individual experience, which is what's actually supposed to happen. And yet, we can get lost in the separateness and not realise that we are connected to everything. And yet, so we're separate and connected. So see the paradox there? So whenever I find a paradox, I find a spiritual truth. So I'm always looking for paradoxes, and I'm very pleasantly surprised when I find them. So this concept of non-dualism, where I'm an individual unit of consciousness which is having its own experience, and my experience is in a sense data that is fed into the larger unit of consciousness, which I might call God, I might call the universe, I might call prime creator. That might be a way of identifying it. You are all other individual units of consciousness having your own experience with your own data and information that is being also fed into that one larger unit. Like the 70 trillion cells, they're all doing their own thing, feeding into this one larger unit. As this one larger unit, I get to have an experience of all of these cells. Not that I know all of the cells individually, but I know that there's systems that are happening here, and things will automatically be happening in a sense, and I can be aware of them. So the Creator gets to know itself through you. In a sense, you are God realising itself, because you are endowed with the same essence that the Creator is. The Creator cannot give you anything that it's not. because it wants to know itself. So in knowing itself, why would it not be itself? See how there's this beautiful fractal of free will that we've spoken about in many other conversations too. So when we then start to look at life through this lens, once again, this doesn't necessarily have to be your truth, but it can be a way, a viewpoint of life. And the beautiful viewpoint of life that this brings is that it changes your experience while you're here on earth. It changes your experience in this lifetime. Because I then start to recognise, and maybe I might start to see through the eyes that, wow, I'm connected to everything. And as I judge another, I'm actually judging myself. I'm judging that part of myself. As I push another away, if I push a behaviour of that person away through judgment, I'm also pushing maybe a part of myself away through my own judgment. So the connectivity in the sense of union allows me to have a greater sense of belonging, allows me to have a greater sense of meaning and purpose, which is always helpful upon this planet, because this planet is, it's a challenging place to grow. It's a very challenging place to grow. And yet, the challenges that come from that offer great rewards as well too. So now we're really talking about, in a sense, that I'm a spiritual being who's choosing to have a particular life in this vehicle on this planet. So from a non-dual perspective, now we're starting to go, okay, so there's more than one planet that has life. There's more than one form that I can take as an individual unit of consciousness. And that there's also more than one lifetime. So now we're opening reincarnation. We're also opening that you can have, so if I'm opening reincarnation, then I can also open that time is both linear and simultaneous, all happening and collapsing into a moment called the now. Okay. You've never ever been out of the now. Everywhere you go is now. Can't get away from it. Our minds like to look at, oh, that was the past and this is the future, it's still about to come, but it's always happening in the now. So time can be both linear and simultaneous. We have lifetimes. Those lifetimes can be also experienced simultaneously. So even though you've had past lifetimes and you're going to have future lifetimes, you can access your past lives and you can also access your future lives in the moment, in the now. And we do this through meditation. We do this through opening up. We do this through questioning as well. Let's even go a little bit further, that you are a fractal, so you can be having more than one lifetime at this moment, not only here on this earth, but on other planets. And let's go even further, that there's more than just one universe, there's the multiverse. Anyone who is a Marvel, you like your Marvel things, the multiverse. And so even from quantum physics and astrophysics now, they're saying that this universe that we're living in at the moment, its too shall pass into another point of singularity, and that point of singularity is then the other point of singularity, then another universe is then created. So now we've got multiple lifetimes happening both linear and simultaneous. We've got multiple universes happening both linear and simultaneous. See how the mind is going, Grace, that's way too much. Can't we just talk about internal family systems and egos at the moment? To see how broad it goes. And the broader and the more expansive it goes, it also then goes inward as well. And I'm using this language, outward and inward, just to give you some points of reference, because everything is, I don't actually know where everything is. So that's the perspective of non-dualism. Now, non-dualism would then suggest that I am consciousness, I'm a unit of consciousness, the essence of me is eternal. I don't actually die. I might return to the Godhead, in a sense, if we're looking at some of the Hindu philosophies, the Brahma, I'm going to return. There's an outward journey and then there's a return journey. A bit like our life at the moment. the childhood development, young adults, adults, older adults returning back to the child in a sense. And some of us in the room have parents who've experienced dementia and gone back into the childlike state. Have to care for them in a sense too. We talk about the circle of security, which is to go out and find and then come back to the loving arms. So when we start to look at these psychological concepts, they're not so far removed from, in a sense, the spiritual concepts that we're really talking about here too. So as consciousness having a human experience, because I've been consciousness that's had non-human experiences, been on different planets, coming from different, in a sense, star seeds, different planetary systems, different areas of the universe. In this moment, where my consciousness is aware and I'm speaking through this vessel, this body, it's in the human experience. I find this human experience really fascinating because what it has is a mind and a body. So I am not the mind and I am not the body. This is the transitory vessel that consciousness visits, holds, becomes a part of for a period of time. Because remember, this too shall pass. So while we're having this transitory human experience, it's probably really good to understand what that human experience is about. And through that experience, we might then start to recognize that, a lot of my life happens in my head, happens in my mind. Your mind is a magical tool. It's a time traveler. Go back in time, go forward in time, it can jump, it can create worlds, it can imagine, it can be creative, it can turn a thought into something physical. That's how magical the mind is. And it can also imprison us, it can stop us from doing things, it can hold us. Can create stories and narratives that maybe aren't true. So probably a good thing to understand the mind. And I think this is part of my journey. I'm a landscaper by trade, that's where I started. But then went into nursing, and then mental health nursing, and then psychotherapy. I grew up in the East, and I was raised in the West, and my search for understanding really took me to the East with Taoism and Buddhism. And I really loved those philosophies in a sense. Buddhism was, in a sense, the science of the mind, so I really resonated with that. I then started to live the way of the East. And then living in the West, I then started to find that there was these psychotherapies called cognitive behavioural therapy and acceptance commitment therapy. And go, hang on, this is very similar to what these Taoist guys are saying. Just they didn't have all the deities and all the other bits and pieces around it. Very much evidence-based and all that. So what it led me to was this deep inquiry into self, deep inquiry into others. And I've always said that the greater understanding of self, the greater understanding of others. And I fell in love with mindfulness. I fell in love with acceptance commitment therapy because it was very closely aligned with Taoism and Buddhism. More recently, I've been introduced to another psychotherapy model called internal family systems. And what it's allowed me to see, and I guess I found it at the right time, because I sort of think to myself, I wish I could have found this earlier, because I probably wouldn't have said half of the stuff that I've said from particular parts that were going, but then I can go, there's perfection in that as well, so maybe I wasn't ready to hear that. So the internal family systems, and it's really beautiful because it fits very much already with the model that I have in my mind, so I can speak to it quite easily and can getting very passionate about it. Actually, hence I'm speaking about it right here and right now. And from this non-dual perspective, consciousness having a human experience, we have a mind-body. The body's really fully automated. You don't have to breathe. You don't have to consider how to filter your blood at what filtration rate. You don't have to consider when I need to go to the toilet. Your body's really telling you to do that. It's telling you when to eat, it's telling you when to, in a sense, sleep. So you just pick up on these signals that the body is letting you know. Sometimes we can resist it, fight it off, push it out, but at the end of the day, it's going to win, in a sense. Okay? But you don't actually have to consciously think about breathing. It's part of the autonomic nervous system, which is just wonderful. We've got this thing called the mind, and the mind is very much related to the body, except that the mind, in a sense, has this capacity to jump timelines, to look at the future, look at past, to create stories, to create narratives, and to create a sense of identity. And this is what the ego is. So Aaron Abke speaks about the ego, and I think it's probably the best explanation that I've heard, is that the ego is the act of identifying. Which is interesting because we give it an identity. Oh, that's the ego. Oh, hang on, I've just identified with something. So rather than the ego being a noun, because when we look at a noun, it's a person, place, or thing. Like, oh, that's the ego. See how we identify it as something? Whereas when Aaron Abke says it, says it's the act of identifying. It's actually a verb. It's an action verb. I'm egoing at the moment. As I'm egoing, I'm identifying that I am this thing, this person, this role. So it's a nice way to look at it, which is interesting because when we look at it from an IFS perspective, we actually, in a sense, give it an identity. It's not a verb anymore. It becomes something because then we go, there's ego states. Oh, now there's a state of egoing. Maybe it's a state of egoing. And I'm still trying to work through this. I'm trying to understand it more. From the Law of One teachings and the teachings of Ra, they speak about the ego as being third density. It's a part that has been created, that is a part of what we call the archetypal mind. So in this experience that we have on Earth, we have particular archetypes, and they speak of it from the perspective of the archetypal mind. When we look at the archetypes, the best way that they've described it is very similar to the major arcana of the tarot, or the Merkaba, or the Tree of Life. Okay, so this is where these understandings of mind come into it too, and that's another conversation just within itself. The mind, its sole purpose is to keep you alive, and I love it because, and let's identify the ego as a thing. Just for the moment, the role of the ego is to keep you alive until you recognise that you're not the ego. Yeah. Like, wow, sounds like a shit job, isn't it? You know. Hey, I'm going to be your husband until you realise that you don't need a husband. Okay, it's a really thankless job. It's quite a heroic job in a sense, isn't it? So this ego has a particular role, and its role is to identify to something that you're actually not. And it knows it. And yet it goes, yeah, I'll do that, no worries. Or it's part of the program of the mind to do that. And the ego is to keep you alive. It's safety and survival. And that's why it identifies with things. There's a hierarchical, social hierarchy that helps with survival. And when we started off as small tribes and small communities, what we would try to do is we would find the best mate, you know, we would, and find the best assets and bring people around us so we could be stronger as a community. And so in doing that, we would identify as things. So this ego has a really significant role. Now, as we're moving from a Law of One perspective from third density into fourth density, which is, in a sense, the age of awakening, the age of enlightenment, we're moving out of the age of Pisces into Aquarius, is that? Yeah?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, let's go with that. Yeah. So as we're moving into this golden age, the golden age of enlightenment, we're now starting to, and other people might call it 3D to 5D, the ascension process, whatever names you want to give to it. As we're moving to that, we're also starting to recognise that this ego, in a sense, and I'll just use this language, the ego's holding us back. Maybe I don't need to be caught up in safety and survival anymore. Maybe I can start to thrive and awaken and move to different states of consciousness, different frequencies, higher frequencies in a sense. And so we're really starting to question the ego more and more. Now, the challenge is that in some of the spiritual traditions and a lot of spiritual teachers, and I have fallen prey to this listening to people, and also, I guess, spouted this stuff as well in my ignorance. And I'd like to say that I've got a little bit more wisdom now. Thank you, ignorance, because it allowed me to seek wisdom. That some of the spiritual traditions are saying that we need to get rid of this ego because it's the thing that holds you back. It gets a very bad rap. We don't like our ego. We don't have a good relationship with it. We're told that it's a bad thing and we need to cut it out. We need to suppress it. We need to ignore it. We need to overcome it. We need to put it aside, which I find interesting. Let's just put this to the side. And in a sense, it has no value. It's sort of like, that's trash. Why do we want trash in the house? Just put it outside. That sort of thing. And by doing that, what I fear, my concern is that we're actually buying into spiritual bypass. I've spoken about spiritual bypass and trying to, in a sense, skip the shadow work. And it's interesting because the shadow work is very much related to ego. So, from an internal family systems perspective, is that we have this mind, and it's not a mono mind, it's a poly mind. So what that suggests is that there's multiple parts of the mind. And we'll use the word parts because it's words and language that we use ourselves. There's a part of me that wanted to come tonight. There's a part of me that didn't want to come tonight. There's a part of me that's a little bit anxious about what I was going to say. There's a part of me that's, that wants to conserve its energy. There's a part of me that wants to just sit back and not say anything. There's a part of me that's really angry and frustrated and irritable about what's going on. So we use the language already. So Richard Schwartz, Dick Schwartz, was the founder of Internal Family Systems. He was a family systems therapist, so it was an external family systems. And he started to notice that the people that he was working with started to, they started to express themselves, and he was primarily working with adolescents and people with bulimia. And he started to notice that there was these particular parts that kept on wanting to, in a sense, come to the forefront and speak, or the behaviours were driven by these particular parts. And there was one part when he was working with a young lady, and she'd been sexually abused as a child, and she would self-harm. It's interesting to use the word self-harm. Even that language suggests that there's the negative connotation. If we could only see the value in it. And having worked in mental health units, we use this language. The PD in bed 8 self-harming again. So now we've taken the name away from the person and given them just a diagnosis, and now also saying that they're self-harming rather than going, the person by the name of who's residing in bed 8 has chosen to cut herself as a form of disassociating from the pain that she's experiencing, because this was a valuable coping mechanism that she learnt when she was being sexually abused.
Yeah.
How different is that?
Yeah.
Notice the mind likes shortcuts. The mind is a miser. It likes to conserve energy. PD in bed ain't self-harming. I'm doing a nursing handover, bang. You know, someone in bed 9's doing this, you know, rather than going, oh, yeah, this is what's actually happening. So what Dick Schwartz or Richard Schwartz was finding was that she would cut herself, or she learned how to disassociate from the pain of the sexual abuse through cutting. And the cutting would allow her to disassociate from that pain, and that was a safe place. So it had value. I've worked in mental health, dual diagnosis, addictions. If we could only start to see addictions as this is valuable. I used to speak of this many, many years ago. You know, what is the value of smoking pot? What is the value of taking drugs? What is the value of your substance use? You know, and they'd be looking at me going, what do you, normally people coming in here and tell me that I'm a bad person because I'm doing bad things. You know, I just want to know why you're doing it, because there's value to it. So if we could start to see it from that perspective, start to see these parts of ourselves and actually inquire into what's your role? Why do you actually do this? The way that I used to speak is that people, we all have an inner critic. And the inner critic is critical. That's where we go. It's the inner critic. We all have self-doubt. The self-doubt is very doubtful. That's why we give it that name. The imposter syndrome, the fraud. So all of these parts of ourselves, they actually have a role. They're critical for a particular purpose. They're doubtful for a particular purpose. I'm anxious because of something. So when I have these parts show, and this is some of the questioning that through IFS, is going, hey, just notice where it is in your body. For me, anxiety sits here. There's a real big knot in the solar plexus. And then another question to ask yourself is, how do you feel towards it? Because we don't wake up in the morning and go, gee, I really hope I get anxious today. I'm looking forward to feeling anxious today. Well, some people might, because depending on their relationship with it. The interesting thing through acceptance commitment therapy is the whole premise of that is value-based decisions, living in the moment, non-judgmental acceptance and awareness, and changing the relationship with the thing that holds you back. We don't try to get rid of it. Don't try and get rid of your parts. You can't get rid of it. Albert Einstein said that energy can neither be destroyed or created. It only transforms. The parts that you have hold an energy. That energy has a particular frequency. That frequency makes you do stuff or not do stuff. If I could start to inquire into it, if I could then start to, number one, understand my relationship with it, because remember, this is your relationship with you. It's not, your parts aren't external to you. Your parts are internal to you. And if you're not having a good relationship with it, then who is the one who can change the relationship with it? Well, I'll go and see a therapist. Maybe they can do it. So these internal parts, we start to become aware that they are valuable. Dick Schwartz's latest book, No Bad Parts, basically saying that all parts have value. Can I inquire into them? So now, and through my book, I was introducing the concept of equanimity. And equanimity is that rather than the mind labelling things as good or bad, everything has value, which I find really interesting, the synchronicities and the similarities of what I was feeling, and then finding these different modalities. And I think that's pretty much how most of my life has been. So this is what I sort of intuit, and then I find where there's been, here's a theory that supports what you're feeling. I guess if I was a researcher, it would be, I would use a grounded theory methodology. Where you go out, ask questions, you create a theory based upon the information that you're getting back, and then you go and research, is this theory something that's already out there, that sort of thing. So you're already making the theory from your observations, rather than going, I've got this hypothesis based on this theory and now we're going to look at that. It works the other way around. So this IFS model suggests that these states, these ego states, these parts all have value. Now that's really interesting, isn't it? Because through the spiritual work, through working through trauma, through coming to a state of enlightenment in a sense, it's not about cutting out part of you because it's bad and I'm going to bring in all of these good parts. It's actually starting to see everything in the whole as actually having a role and having a value. And those parts are there because they've been forced into those roles because of the experiences that you've had that we could label as trauma. And those parts are protectors. So in IFS there's three main parts. There's exiles, there's managers, and there's firefighters. From my understanding, the exiles are the really, in a sense, the youngest parts of us that are so sensitive that through experiences they've been hurt. They've been hurt so much that, you know, there could be some shame and guilt related to them, but they've been hurt so much that another part will then come in to protect you or that part from being exposed, from that part being hurt any longer. And those protectors usually come in either the manager or the firefighter. The firefighter, they'll come in and they'll put out the fire. They don't care who they hurt, what they say, or any consequences that come from it. They're firefighters. You know? And our lovely firefighters, if there's a fire hydrant and there's a $120,000 Mercedes that's sitting in front of it and they need to get to it, they're going to smash it up because they need to put out the fire at all costs. So the firefighter might come in and go, you're a this and that and get away from me and this is what I think of you, and it puts out the fire. And then after that, another part comes out, which is the manager goes, oh geez, you could have said that a different way, but it doesn't necessarily say it that way. It's quite critical. You idiot. Look at what you've done. You can't control your anger. Shut up and sit in the corner. I'll go and sort this out now. So see how these parts, now they're interacting with each other, but they don't know that they're part of the whole. They think that they're separated. So if we then go and go, you firefighter, you manager, you're bad, you get out of here. You go, hang on, I'm just protecting this part over here. Can't you see what I'm doing? No, you're bad, you're part of the ego. We need to cut you out, we need to dissolve you, we need to, you know. So see how, in a sense, through a lot of modern psychotherapy, because we do this in cognitive behavioural therapy, classic, because they have erroneous thinking. They have good thinking and bad thinking. That's bad thinking. You need to get rid of that. Hang on. And the beautiful thing I loved about acceptance commitment therapy was that there was no bad thinking. You just notice what's arising. Everything has value. So even, and this it still astounds me that psychologists are taught cognitive behavioural therapy as the base therapy. And then you can learn these other things. So we're being taught a therapy, and we trust psychologists. If we've got any mental health stuff going on, you go and see a psych. And they're being taught a model that judges your thinking. That concerns me as a human being, because I've got a mind that likes to judge stuff. And if this is what I'm being taught, or if this is what people are sharing with me, or if I'm going to a health professional and this is their only modality or what they're basing themselves on, we are in big trouble. Because then the only other thing is that you can't get rid of these parts, so what do we then do? Here, have a tablet. Let's dull your experience. Now, as you might guess, I'm not necessarily mainstream and I am controversial. So I try to steer people away from medication. I'm not saying medication is not warranted. Through the IFS lens, very profound words here, and it's only 2 words. Self heals. So when you tap into self, and you can come from a state of self-reliance, self-trust, self-faith, that part heals. It can hold. It has capacity for these other parts to step back. And as they can step back, they don't have to hold that burden anymore. And they can put that down. And part of the questioning through IFS is that, and we speak to the part, if you didn't have to protect that part, what would you like to do? They're actually asking you. I just find this such a beautiful way to interact with self. You're not criticising self, you're honouring self, you're inquiring into it. And we've spoken about witnessing, the witnessing process before. How important that is. Witnessing is being seen and being heard. When you're seen and you're heard, you are validated. When you feel validated, you feel that there's a sense of trust. Then I can inquire into you, and then I can then share. And then I'm seen and I'm heard and I'm trusted. And this creates this beautiful flow, this beautiful discussion. So imagine if you could then start to relate to yourself in that way, rather than pushing yourself away. So each and every day, you will get to meet your parts. You know, I've spoken about this mantra, I wonder what life will place upon my path today that will bring me to a greater awareness of self and others. I wonder what life will place upon my path today. I wonder what parts of me I'll meet today that I can gain a greater awareness of self and others. So this is a beautiful model of looking at life. It's a beautiful model of looking at self, because what it does is it creates compassion. It's a diffusion process, because now I can become aware that, hey, you know, there's a part that's arising within me at the moment. Can I speak that with you? And the other person sits with me and goes, yeah, I'd love to hear what that part wants to say. Rather than going, I am the part, I am the anger, I am the anxiety, I am the frustration, I am the betrayal, I am the mistrust. I'm noticing there's a part of me that just doesn't feel as though I can trust this information. So see, there's a beautiful... So that's dual awareness. And this concept of self. So that concept of self can either be a greater understanding of self from the seat of awareness, or it could be consciousness having a human experience. The essence of me is noticing that I'm having this human experience. Or it just could be another part of the mind that you're identifying as self. It doesn't really matter. It's more so the essence of that self and the way that it's looking. And in IFS there's 8 C's. I don't know all of them, but it's you're creative, you've got clarity, you're curious, there's calm.
Compassion.
Connection.
Compassion.
Compassion.
Curiosity.
Curiosity. Yeah.
Curiosity, I think we said that one, yeah. So there's 2 more there. I've got a really beautiful slide that I can put up tonight. We've got 8 C's and there's 4 P's as well. Be present, be patient, that sort of thing. So they're the essence of self that from an IFS perspective they speak about. I believe that that essence of self would also be related to the essence of you as a seat of consciousness as well. So remember too that you as consciousness have chosen to have a human experience. As you have the human experience, you then feed that information, that data into the larger mind of consciousness, so it can have its experience. So each and every day, you are, in a sense, expanding how the universe is growing. How the universe expands is actually related to how you expand, how you have your experience. And this is how significant you are. So, non-dual lens, consciousness having a human experience. The human experience has a mind. The mind is multi-mind, multi-parts. Those parts will interact with each other. Those parts all have value. Try not to get rid of them, cut them out. Try to have a really beautiful, conscious conversation with those parts. Ask them what their role is. Ask them what they're trying to protect. And also ask them, if you didn't have to do that, what would you like to do? That's how you transform it. See, we're not cutting it out. What we're doing is we're going, hey, we understand that you have this role. We, as in self, if self, energy, could take the capacity to do that role for you, what would you like to do? So rather than being a protector, it might want to be a cheerleader. So then we give it and assign it a different role. We don't assign it a role, it chooses the role. Yeah. See the honouring that goes in that? Even the essence of that. You're not saying, all right, you don't have to do that anymore, you can do that. Hang on. Sounds like our government. You know? It's, what would you like to do? What would you like to do? Oh, I'd love to go and play. I'd love to be creative. I'd love to go and do some hobbies. Sure, no worries. Let's do that. I'd love to be a part of that experience with you. Let's celebrate it. So ego is not a dirty word. It's something that can be celebrated. It gets a really bad rap. It has a thankless job. And I think it's time that we can honour it. And hopefully through this conversation, I've been able to maybe enlighten some synapses that haven't been lit up before, maybe join some that have been, and maybe even consolidate some. And if none of those, maybe I've challenged your paradigms. Think